September 10, 1939, was a significant day in the early stages of World War II, marking both the expansion of the conflict and the intensification of the German assault on Poland. As the German forces continued their relentless advance, the Allies faced mounting pressure to respond more decisively. The day was also notable for Canada's official entry into the war, reflecting the growing recognition that the conflict would not remain confined to Europe and would require a coordinated global effort. Meanwhile, the Polish resistance persisted in the face of overwhelming odds, demonstrating both the courage of the defenders and the brutality of the German military machine. This day, like those before it, underscored the rapidly evolving nature of the war and the profound challenges faced by nations worldwide. The German advance, securing dominance in Poland. By September 10th, the German Wehrmacht had solidified its gains across Poland, pressing further toward Warsaw and other key strategic locations. The Blitzkrieg tactics, characterized by rapid coordinated attacks involving tanks, motorized infantry, and air support, continued to devastate Polish defenses. German forces were now pushing towards the eastern bank of the Vistula River, aiming to complete the encirclement of Warsaw and prevent any potential Polish retreat or regrouping. On this day, German forces focused on tightening the noose around Warsaw, preparing for the eventual assault on the city. The Luftwaffe maintained its intense aerial campaign, conducting heavy bombing raids over Warsaw and other major Polish cities. The goal was to cripple Polish military infrastructure, disrupt supply lines, and demoralize both the military and the civilian population. Reports from the front lines indicated that the German advance was encountering little organized resistance, as Polish units were either destroyed, isolated, or forced into a hasty retreat. German propaganda continued to portray the campaign as a necessary defensive measure, emphasizing the rapid success of the military operations and portraying the invasion as a justified action to secure Germany's borders. This narrative was intended to maintain domestic support for the war and to justify the harsh measures being employed against Poland. Poland's determined resistance, the ongoing struggle for Warsaw. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Polish military and civilian population remained determined to resist the German invasion. On September 10th, the Battle of the Bzura, Poland's largest counteroffensive of the campaign, continued. Led by General Tadeusz Kościuszko, Polish forces launched a series of attacks against the German 8th Army near the Bzura River, west of Warsaw. This counteroffensive aimed to disrupt the German advance and buy time for the defense of the capital. The initial stages of the Battle of the Bzura had seen some successes, with Polish forces managing to push back German units and inflict casualties. However, as the battle wore on, the limitations of the Polish military became increasingly apparent. Lacking modern equipment, air support, and sufficient supplies, the Polish forces struggled to sustain their offensive. The Germans quickly adapted, bringing in reinforcements and utilizing their superior air power to halt the Polish advance. By September 10th, the momentum of the counteroffensive was beginning to falter, as German forces regained the initiative and launched counterattacks to contain the Polish effort. In Warsaw, preparations for a prolonged siege continued. The Polish capital, now fully encircled, faced the grim reality of being cut off from the rest of the country. The city's defenders, comprising regular army units, local militias, and civilian volunteers, braced for an imminent German assault. The humanitarian situation in Warsaw was worsening, with shortages of food, water, and medical supplies becoming more acute. Despite the dire circumstances, the spirit of resistance remained strong, bolstered by the leadership of figures like Mayor Stefan Starzyński, who continued to rally the population through his daily radio broadcasts. The Allied response. Canada joins the war and strategic deliberations continue. As the situation in Poland grew more desperate, the Allies faced increasing pressure to act. On September 10th, Canada officially declared war on Germany, becoming the first independent nation in the British Commonwealth to join the conflict. This declaration was a significant step, reflecting Canada's commitment to supporting Britain and the Allied cause. The decision was made independently by the Canadian government, illustrating the autonomy of the Dominion within the Commonwealth and signaling Canada's readiness to contribute to the global war effort. In the United Kingdom, the news of Canada's entry into the war was welcomed as a sign of growing international support. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's government continued to face pressure to take more decisive action to support Poland and confront Germany. The British Expeditionary Force, BEF, was still in the process of deploying to France, and there was an ongoing debate within the War Cabinet about the best strategy to adopt. The Royal Navy's blockade of Germany was in full effect, aiming to weaken the German war economy by cutting off essential supplies, while the Royal Air Force, RAF, focused on defensive operations and reconnaissance. Despite the public's growing impatience, British government remained cautious about launching a full-scale offensive against Germany. The logistical challenges of such an undertaking were considerable, and there was concern about the potential for heavy casualties without clear strategic gains. The focus remained on preparing for a long war, with an emphasis on building up military capabilities and coordinating closely with France. In France, the government of Prime Minister Édouard Daladier also welcomed Canada's entry into the war as a positive development, but the strategic dilemmas remained. The French army continued to fortify the Maginot Line and prepare for a potential German offensive in the west. While there were calls within the French military for more aggressive action to support Poland, the overall strategy remained defensive, reflecting the desire to avoid a repeat of the devastating losses suffered in World War I. French public opinion was increasingly anxious about the situation in Poland and the broader implications for Europe. There was a sense of frustration with the perceived inaction of the government and a growing recognition that the war could not be won through defensive measures alone. The limited actions in the Saar region, intended to test German defenses, had not been followed by any significant offensive, further fueling concerns about France's preparedness for a prolonged conflict. International reactions, strategic calculations, and shifting alliances. The developments on September 10 continued to provoke strong reactions from around the world, prompting countries to reassess their positions and strategies in light of the rapidly evolving conflict. In the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt maintained his policy of neutrality but was increasingly concerned about the potential implications of the conflict for global stability. The Roosevelt administration continued to explore ways to support the Allies without directly entering the war, including the possibility of expanding economic and material aid through measures like the cash-and-carry policy. This policy would allow belligerents to purchase arms from the U.S. as long as they transported the goods themselves, providing a means of aiding Britain and France while maintaining American neutrality. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin and his advisors closely monitored the situation in Poland. The secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, and as German forces advanced deeper into Polish territory, the Soviet Union prepared to assert its interests in the eastern part of the country. The Red Army was placed on high alert, ready to intervene when the time was deemed appropriate. Soviet propaganda continued to present the conflict as a capitalist war, while preparations for potential military action were underway behind the scenes. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's regime continued to advocate for a negotiated peace, positioning Italy as a potential mediator in the conflict. On September 10th, Mussolini reiterated his proposal for an international conference to resolve the war, seeking to bolster Italy's diplomatic standing while avoiding direct involvement in the conflict. However, this offer was largely dismissed by the Western Allies, who viewed it as an attempt to weaken their resolve and buy time for the Axis powers. Other neutral nations, such as Switzerland, Sweden, and the Netherlands, continued to strengthen their defenses and prepare for potential spillover from the conflict. These countries, aware of their strategic positions and vulnerabilities, sought to maintain their neutrality while preparing for potential threats from both the Axis and Allied powers. The situation was particularly tense in Belgium and the Netherlands, where fears of German invasion prompted increased military readiness and diplomatic efforts to secure guarantees of neutrality. Media coverage and global public opinion. On September 10th, media coverage around the world continued to focus on the dramatic events unfolding in Poland and the broader strategic implications of the war. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and newsreels provided updates on the military situation and the responses of the belligerent nations, shaping public perceptions and understanding of the conflict. In the United Kingdom, the BBC and major newspapers like The Times and The Daily Telegraph reported on Canada's entry into the war and the ongoing battles in Poland. Coverage emphasized the importance of solidarity among the Allies and the need for national unity in the face of the growing threat posed by Nazi Germany. Editorials called for increased support for Poland and debated the merits of launching an offensive against Germany versus continuing a more cautious approach. In France, newspapers such as Le Figaro and Le Monde covered the limited military actions in the Saar region and the situation in Poland. The French press reflected the public's growing anxiety and frustration with the government's perceived lack of decisive action. Opinion pieces called for greater coordination with the British and a more aggressive stance to support Poland, while others warned of the risks of escalating the conflict without adequate preparation. In Germany, state-controlled media continued to push the narrative of a justified war effort, emphasizing the successes of the Wehrmacht in Poland and the righteousness of Germany's actions. Propaganda outlets like Völkischer Beobachter and Der Angriff highlighted the military victories and portrayed the war as a defensive struggle against foreign aggression. The propaganda aimed to maintain public morale and support for the war effort, even as the realities of a prolonged conflict began to take shape. In the United States, newspapers such as the New York Times and the Washington Post provided extensive coverage of the events in Europe, with detailed analyses of military movements and diplomatic developments. The American press remained largely neutral but increasingly recognized the potential implications of the conflict for U.S. foreign policy and global stability. Opinion pieces explored the debate over isolationism versus engagement, reflecting the ongoing uncertainty within American society about the nation's role in the world. Strategic implications and the road ahead. The events of September 10, 1939, highlighted the rapid escalation of the conflict and the strategic dilemmas faced by all parties involved. For Poland, the day marked another critical phase in the defense of Warsaw, as the city prepared for a siege that would test its endurance and resolve. The Polish government's appeals for more substantial Allied support reflected a growing sense of desperation, as the promised assistance seemed increasingly unlikely to arrive in time to make a meaningful difference. For the United Kingdom and France, the day underscored the complexities of coalition warfare and the challenges of transitioning from peace to war. Both nations were still adjusting to the realities of a conflict that they had hoped to avoid and were grappling with the strategic uncertainties of how best to respond to German aggression. The debates over offensive versus defensive strategies, and the extent to which they could and should support Poland directly, reflected broader tensions within the Allied leadership that would continue to shape the early phases of the war. Internationally, the events of September 10th prompted further reassessments and strategic recalibrations. The United States maintained its official stance of neutrality but was increasingly aware of the potential global implications of the conflict. The Soviet Union, Italy, and other nations watched closely, each calculating how best to navigate the rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape to their advantage. Conclusion: a war deepening and global stakes rising. September 10, 1939, was a day of intensifying conflict and growing uncertainty, as the rapid German advance in Poland and the hesitant Allied response highlighted the complexities of the early days of World War II. The unfolding events revealed the challenges of coalition warfare, the limits of pre-war planning and preparation, and the unpredictable nature of a conflict that was beginning to engulf much of Europe and threaten global stability. For the nations involved, it was a time of critical decisions and strategic positioning, as they sought to navigate a war that was evolving faster than anyone had anticipated. For the people of the world, it was a time of fear, hope, and resilience, as they faced the prospect of another devastating conflict and the challenges that lay ahead. The events of September 10th set the stage for a war that would reshape the political, social, and economic landscape of the 20th century, leaving an indelible mark on history.